These theoretical models aren't covered in holistic tarot, but I do think it's important to examine them at the early stages of studying tarot as a novice. So we're adding it to the core curriculum, and you'll be learning about it through these companion videos. Now let's talk critical theory and interpreting tarot cards. I categorize tarot card interpretive approaches into 6 paradigms: traditional literary, formalist or structuralist, post-structuralist, Marxist, because social class and economics have such a strong bearing over our destinies, cultural materialist, and finally psychic. An actual tarot reading is going to be a seamless and fluid synthesis or fusion of many facets of what you see on the screen. Kind of like how a melody is a seamless, fluid synthesis of various components in music theory, a staccato here, whole note, quarter notes, specific chord progressions. Then beyond that, the performance of music is a magical experience, an experience totally unlike the practice of a musical instrument. So that's worth remembering here as well. At this early juncture point of course study, we're talking about practice, not performance. The magical performance of a tarot reading is not in the same ballpark at all of what we'll be talking about in this video. Okay, now let's get started. Just like music, the intuitive, creative art of tarot reading can be broken down into theory, and that's what we're going to cover. Here, when I say critical theory, I mean a dialectical process for trying to understand the different ways tarot readers approach interpreting cards. Music playing is an art form, right? And music theory is the dialectical process for understanding that art. Here, tarot reading is an art form. Yes, but to command a comprehensive understanding of that art form, we need to understand theory. Let's start by talking about a traditional literary paradigm for interpreting tarot cards. A traditional literary reading of a card is to consider the historical context of when that specific tarot card was produced, or to consider the biographical notes of the deck creator and try to understand what facets of the deck creator's identity influence the imagery on the tarot card. You would also want to contemplate the artist's intentions. And of course, you might defer to card meanings found in tarot books. That's a traditional literary approach to interpreting a tarot card. The traditional literary approach is about tracking influence, clarifying historical context, understanding symbolism or illusions in the tarot card imagery through historical context, and subserviently inheriting what these cards mean from the tarot masters that have come before us. A formalistic approach, also called the structuralist paradigm, is going to contain the methods of interpretation within the 4 corners of the card. In other words, you look at the imagery on the card and rely entirely off that imagery to tell a story, to extract an interpretation from the imagery and symbolism on the card itself. So for instance, in the Three of Cups, I might say that there is a celebration, jubilee, enjoying the social company of others, enjoying plenitude. I can pull those meanings from the 3 figures on the card raising their goblets. I can pull those meanings from the cornucopia around them. Now, under a structuralist approach, I would not say something like, here the Three of Cups means there is glory for attaining much sought after esoteric knowledge, which shall come to fruition on June 12th when transiting Mercury enters Cancer. I would argue that's a perfectly valid reading of the Three of Cups based on certain astrological, Kabbalistic, perhaps even psychic, and cultural materialist attributions for the Three of Cups. But by definition, it isn't a structuralist or formalistic approach. In formalistic theory, you're going to do a close reading of the actual imagery on the card. Remember, what's contained within the 4 corners of the card. You want to study what's in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Foreground is going to be symbolism that's more pressing, imminent, urgent, the main focus. Middle ground may be supporting influences. What's in the background suggests what may be to come. This is where we also look at color symbolism and directionality. Again, the rule of thumb to remember, contained within the 4 corners of the card. If it's about reading an entire tarot spread, then the structuralist approach is to focus on what's actually depicted across the landscape of the tarot spread as a whole. A post-structuralist approach is almost like a critique of the structuralist approach.
Here, we're saying you can't rely merely on what's contained within the four corners of the card or within the literal universe of a tarot landscape. You have to reach beyond the card to derive meaning. So now you look beyond the four corners of the card.
Under post-structuralist theory, a practitioner would need to be able to draw from pre-existing knowledge of numerology, astrology, hermeticism, Kabbalistic principles, and metaphysical attributions of a card. The example I gave earlier in the reading, the Three of Cups through Kabbalistic and astrological attributions, would be an example of a post-structuralist approach. If I start drawing inferences from the associations with alchemical water, then that's a post-structuralist approach.
Post-structuralism also accounts for what's referred to as the reader response factor. The reader response factor is how you subjectively, as an individual, within the context of your ideologies, faith, culture, and adopted philosophies, interpret the specific symbolism and imagery contained in the card. The reader response factor means how you read a card because of who you are and where you come from is going to be different from how I read the same exact card because of who I am and where I come from. And we are both going to be correct as defined by a post-structuralist paradigm.
Let's give an example. Note the snake coiled in key 6, the lovers. Under post-structuralist theory, a Western view of the snake may be ominous, treacherous, and portending temptation or even evil. The snake is cunning, with cunning taking on a negative connotation.
However, an Eastern view may be the complete opposite. While the snake is seen as cunning, that cunning is taken as a positive connotation. Furthermore, that snake might symbolize wisdom, magic, transformation, psychic connections, intelligence, and ingenuity. In divination, as symbolism, a snake is going to be construed much more positively through Eastern lenses than through Western.
Under a formal literary or structuralist paradigm, the Eastern symbolic reading of a snake in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck could arguably be considered incorrect if you consider the Western historical or Judeo-Christian context, whereas that Eastern symbolic reading under a post-structuralist paradigm is going to be okay. It passes as a correct interpretation of the card.
The premise of post-structuralist theory as applied to interpreting a tarot card is that you're going to build a different interpretive relationship with the card from my interpretive relationship, simply because of who we are, where we come from, and how we think. In other words, to interpret a tarot card, the imagery itself is not enough, which was the formalistic or structuralist approach. Rather, the combination of the imagery and who is reading that imagery together in summation produce the interpretation of the card. Even metaphysical correspondences are about the reader response factor because what your astrological and elemental attributions are for the cards may be totally different from my astrological and elemental attributions due to coming from different mystery traditions. That's the reader response factor.
A Marxist reading of a tarot card is going to look at the social class and economic distinctions portrayed in the card imagery. You are looking at the card through the lens of economic systems, social constructs, and ideologies. In classical attributions, for instance, the suit of wands corresponds with the proletariat or the working class. There's also this idea of innovation, creativity, ingenuity, and industrialization. The suit of cups corresponds with the clergy. So a Marxist reading of cards from the suit of cups will account for spirituality, faith, mysticism, and a sense of knowledge beyond common knowledge. The suit of swords corresponds with the nobility, but also the warrior class. There's both embedded into the suit of swords as classist ideas. The suit of swords and elemental air throughout the tarot architecture can also be read as ideologically in reference to the class of scholars, the erudite, the barristers, politicians, and those who advance discourse in society. The suit of pentacles corresponds with artisans and merchants. Here we see commerce, entrepreneurship, and capital exchange. So when there is a dominance of cards from the suit of pentacles in a tarot spread, financial factors are probably driving the situation at hand, and you're going to want to account for those financial factors as you drive toward a solution. When you look at the Hanged Man, right, through a Marxist reading of the card, you're going to conclude that this person is an outlier in society. This is someone that society believes can be sacrificed. Yet the golden halo and the card's alchemical association with water, which relates to one in society who possesses mystical or religious knowledge, tells us there is a Messiah archetype being expressed here. Let's take a look at the Nine of Cups. If you had to label the figure in that card as either a have or have not through a Marxist reading, is this card about someone who is a have or a have not? Okay, Five of Pentacles. If you had to say either have or have not, is the theme of this card about a have or have not? What socioeconomic or occupational class is depicted in the Three of Pentacles? What are the social interactions or social and bargained for exchange going on here? What occupation is being depicted here in the Seven of Pentacles? Here's a farmer, someone who tills the land. Now, does that mean literally when the Seven of Pentacles shows up, we are always referring to someone whose occupation is in agriculture? Not necessarily. Here, the farmer can be construed metaphorically. This is about sowing seeds, tending to the seeds we've sowed, and then watching them bear fruit for us. A Marxist paradigm for understanding court cards is particularly helpful. Pages are apprentices, knights are upwardly mobile, queens hold prestige, but do they hold true power? Kings denote the command of power, of having control in a situation, of being a decision maker. If you're asking about your professional aspirations and adopting a Marxist paradigm, perhaps when a Page of Cups shows up, the seeker has to think about themes of apprenticeship as to perhaps a creative or even mystical path. If the Page of Swords shows up about career, there's rough draft writing and planning involved. Whereas the King of Pentacles in a love and relationship reading may be a bit more controlling, domineering, who needs to feel in control, maybe especially over finances in the relationship.
As professional tarot readers, more often than not, clients come to us with everyday mundane issues that are about money, career, relationships, and matters tethered to socioeconomics. Relationship readings, when you do enough of them, you'll realize often relate fundamentally to socioeconomic issues. And to understand the interplays in that relationship, you've got to address the social, civil, or economic influences. That's why understanding the 78 cards of tarot through a Marxist framework is immensely helpful.
Now let's talk about cultural materialism.
Under a traditional literary approach to tarot reading, which we covered earlier, you'd consider the deck creator's intentions when the deck was created and what was going on historically at the time the deck was created. So you're examining card meaning through the vacuum context of when it was actually produced. However, under a cultural materialist reading of a tarot reading, instead of looking at the tarot deck creator's culture and history, you look to your own culture and society right now.
So it's about what the Eight of Wands means right now in today's world. For instance, it's doubtful that Waite would have interpreted the Eight of Wands as meaning the internet, online discourse, social media, or email communications. However, under a cultural materialist point of view, you could very well interpret the Eight of Wands to mean just that in today's digital age. So, under a cultural materialist paradigm, you're taking the Eight of Wands like a puzzle piece and moving that puzzle piece around the landscape of today's society to figure out where it fits. So, you read a tarot card through the framework of the here and now. Pop culture references are helpful when adopting a cultural materialist paradigm. For example, you pull the Queen of Wands. What Hollywood actors to you embody that Queen of Wands? Name them. Then consider what the prevailing qualities are of those specific Hollywood actors. Those qualities are somehow relevant in the tarot reading at hand. Where might we find the judgment card in present day society? Here, there is a sense of realizing a huge change needs to happen, and it's not just about a single person, but it's about a collective change, something that has to take place across a wider consciousness. And the people are on the brink of realizing that they need to work together to create that change. There's the great angel above sounding the trumpet. This is a call to action. So, under a cultural materialist reading of judgment, perhaps it denotes social or civil activism.
The Queen of Swords is another card I find whose meaning has changed dramatically if you're examining it through a cultural materialist standpoint. In the early 1900s, here's a woman who is cruel, argumentative, dispassionate, doesn't know her place, most likely childless. In fact, she probably hates kids. Heck, maybe she eats babies for breakfast. Today, because of how society has evolved in its views on women, especially women who are perhaps more assertive and career oriented, likewise, how tarot readers in the 21st century tend to interpret the Queen of Swords will be different from some of the earlier card meanings assigned to her.
Finally, we get to psychic reading. Here's a dirty little secret. A psychic reading of a tarot card is in fact one of or a synchronistic combination of the other fixed analytical paradigms, except instead of taking the long route of step-by-step intentional critical assessment, you arrive at the destination through a direct unconscious knowing.
Although I don't address psychic reading in holistic tarot, since holistic tarot is a beginner's foray into the tarot, I do address psychic tarot readings and psychic development in one of my online courses, Tarot as a Tool for Craft. To summarize briefly, psychic tarot reading is about drawing upon clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, and claircognizance. A clairvoyant reading of a tarot card would be to start with what's on the tarot card as an initial slide of narrative, and then because of that card, you're now able to draw upon clairvoyance to see the rest of the narrative beyond that tarot card by extending from that card. Clairaudience is hearing the sounds associated with the themes displayed on the card and then being able to pinpoint where in a seeker's life those sounds are from, and from there give a reading to the seeker about what's going on in the seeker's life. When you study art or literature for scholarship to deepen your understanding of culture and humanities, you examine the body of work from different angles through different lenses that we call critical theory. What would be the formalistic approach of this work? What would be the post-structuralist view? What's the cultural materialistic angle? Now, when you step back out of the world of scholarship and engage with art or literature intuitively, expressively, fusing it with your creative nature, you don't necessarily isolate view of the work through specific critical lenses. It becomes an integrative, holistic approach. You lean in with your feelings and emotions, but because of your deepened scholarly background, those feelings and emotions are now easier to define, and you can express your feelings and emotions with greater accuracy and precision. There's no more, I don't know, I just feel that way, but rather you can express yourself with a full range of vocabulary.
Here's the key takeaway point for understanding critical theory as applied to tarot card interpretation. As the critical theory chart indicated, there are many different paradigms through which a tarot reader might interpret a card reading.
Now that you understand the different paradigms and names for those different paradigms, you're in a more learned position to discuss tarot card meanings with others.
See, if you're talking about what key six, the lover's card, means through the lens of a traditional literary paradigm, and I'm talking about the lover's card through a cultural materialist paradigm, and we have differing conclusions. What you often see happening is you and I fight with each other and argue about the true meaning of key six, the lovers. Say you tell me this card is about the secret law of divine providence, of innocence, naivety, and is about God's love for man. And I say to you, what the hell are you talking about? This card is definitely about two people getting married. This card is about romantic love. If you are adopting a traditional literary approach, you might disagree with me and say that key six, the lover's card, has nothing at all to do with marriage. And in fact, Waite himself, the creator of the deck, tried to distance the card meaning away from the idea of marriage. So in fact, I am wrong. I have interpreted the card incorrectly, you would say to me. Now, through my cultural materialist paradigm, I cannot for the life of me understand how you could not understand that obviously the lover's card is about love, ergo marriage. Or maybe through the reader response factor, a post structuralist paradigm, the imagery on the lover's card is unequivocally, to me, about marriage. You and I proceed to argue to no end about the right way to interpret the lover's card. But here's the thing, it's an absurd, meaningless argument to be having because we're talking apples and oranges.
I think a more learned way to discuss tarot card interpretation is to start with the same paradigm, or to at least begin by defining our paradigm. Now, if we are both operating under a traditional literary reading of the card, now we can have a robust and meaningful conversation about how to read the lover's card through what A.E. Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith might have intended. Or we can talk about the lover's card in a more constructive way through the reader response factor because we're both post-structuralists. Or at the very least, now we can identify, oh, I see you're looking at the lover's card as a formalist, whereas I'm looking at the lover's card as a cultural materialist. So that's why we're arriving at different conclusions.
Another controversy you often hear among tarot readers is, do you need to know astrology or know the Kabbalah to adequately read the tarot? Some say yes, some say no. Most people try to be PC and say just let everybody do their own thing, and the controversy never gets settled. Because why? Because we've failed to use precise language. When you use precise language, suddenly the controversy is settled. Under a post-structuralist paradigm, yes, going beyond the four corners of the card and thus bringing in external knowledge of other esoteric branches would be the more complete way to read a tarot card. But under a formalistic approach, that's not true at all. If you're reading tarot through a formalistic paradigm, you would stay contained within the four corners of the card, and therefore you would not be bringing in external knowledge of astrology or the Kabbalah. Now we understand rather unambiguously that these two tarot readers are operating under different paradigms.
Now let's revisit the guided tarot reading you did toward the end of video lecture Tarot Trends and the Anatomy of a Reading with the Worth Cross Tarot Spread. If you need to review the lecture, a link will be provided in the description box.
We're going to demonstrate the different critical theory techniques by applying them to a sample reading with the Worth Cross. If you haven't done this reading exercise yet, then get your tarot deck out and follow along. I'll review the process and you can do the reading right now. Recall card one is assertion. This is going to give us a sense of the light, the opportunity, what's favorable. Card two is negation or the dark, the challenges, what's against you. Card three above is discussion, which is a consideration and balancing of all factors, a weighing of the circumstances. Card 4 below is the solution or most likely outcome. There can be a projective value here. Card 4 will prognosticate something. Card 5, the center, is synthesis, or the culmination of all factors and energies at play. This is a thesis statement. And just to reiterate from the previous video lecture, this is the Worth cross, a spread from Oswald Worth's Tarot of the Magicians. After you finish watching this video lecture, purely as a practice exercise, you'll read card 1 of your Worth cross through a traditional literary lens. Check Waite's pictorial key to see what he has to say about your card 1. If you're using a specific deck other than the RWS, check the companion guidebook that comes with the deck. Look up the card meaning in Holistic Tarot. Card 2, negation, will be interpreted by applying a formalist or structuralist approach. Just look at what's happening within the illustration. Tell a story that begins with what's happening in your card 2. This story will parallel a narrative in your life path that's relevant at the moment. Card 3, discussion, apply a post-structuralist reading of the card. Here, consider a couple different angles. 1. What is the astrological and numerological correspondences for the card? Correspondence tables are provided in the appendix section of Holistic Tarot. Also, consider your subjective experience of the card. What does the card have to say to you in particular? Card 4, the solution. Think about the social change denoted and apply a Marxist reading. And finally, the center card, synthesis. Apply a cultural materialist reading. Think about the indications of this card and its significance right now, today, in your current culture and society. At this stage of learning, we're going to focus on the first 5 theoretical techniques. Among these supplemental handouts to download will be the chart you see on the screen. Use it as a reference to help you navigate the specific reading techniques for each of the 5 cards. You'll fill out your assessment in the right column, reading notes. Holistic Tarot's Cyclopedia section doesn't compartmentalize the many facets of each card into these theoretical models. Rather, it presents classical interpretations overall with notes on popular correspondences for each card. Armed with what's in the Cyclopedia section and this video's explanation for how you can arrive at card meanings on your own, you are now better able to formulate tarot interpretations through an analytical schema.